What are the six best landing spots for Aaron Rodgers in the trade based on their fantasy football potential? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another week and another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Our Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and after this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. It's a big offseason ahead in the NFL, more big quarterback rumors, none bigger than Aaron Rodgers looking for a trade out of Green Bay. It looks like the Packers are done with him, and they're looking for the best possible offer to make a trade out of Green Bay. So, interesting times. We thought the names were big last year when we had Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson and Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz and all those quarterbacks change teams. Now we have the biggest one of them all that isn't Tom Brady from a couple of years ago. Aaron Rodgers potentially on the move, and there are a lot of suitors that are set up to go after him, and we're going to look at those teams. There's actually six teams that I have on my radar most, and what we're going to do here on the show, because it's Locked On Fantasy Football, look at them from the fantasy football perspective. What would be the best landing spots for not only Aaron Rodgers and his fantasy football production as he moves on from Green Bay, but also for the skill players on the teams that he's going to join here in 2023 potentially. So we'll break that down for you on this episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? If so, this game is definitely for you to download. The game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Listeners to Locked On Fantasy Football get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On, all caps, when playing inside the game. All right, let's dive right into it, and we'll start at the top because that's a good place to go right away. And we know what that destination is. If you've been paying attention, it is keeping Aaron Rodgers in green and sending him to the Jets. They did hire Nathaniel Hackett, his former quarterback's coach, a strong confidant there under Matt LaFleur in Green Bay. We thought that's what the Broncos were doing last year when they hired Hackett. Instead, they ended up with Russell Wilson. That turned into a disaster, and they moved on with Sean Payton. Now the Jets have Nathaniel Hackett. They're definitely going to go after Aaron Rodgers. They're not happy with Zach Wilson, obviously, after 2 years. That's it for the number 2 overall pick from a couple years ago. So it's Mike White or Joe Flacco. No, both of those guys are free agents. Flacco is going to head into retirement most likely, and White just a guy here, and he didn't really show that he was going to be a quarterback of the future when filling in for Wilson. So they're definitely circling the wagons, trying to put together the best offer to go after Aaron Rodgers. This would make them an instant contender in the AFC. We saw how strong their defense was with Robert Saleh. Did they get a quarterback with some of their offensive weapons? They're in great shape in New York, and they'd be a threat, I think, to even Josh Allen and the Bills. That's how good they are, and I think they would definitely jump the Dolphins and Patriots here. That's how important Aaron Rodgers is to this team because he's really the missing piece. He would be a massive upgrade. Remember, they didn't have anything at quarterback, and they were still competitive. Look how great they were defensively here. Quinnen Williams on the front end. You had the defensive rookie of the year, Ahmad Sauce Gardner, on the back end. What a complete team this could be from a reality perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, let's look at this. You got the 2 rookies from last year, had big seasons, one before he got hurt. Breece Hall out of the backfield, a key factor there. Garrett Wilson was outstanding once he got going as their number 1 receiver. It would wake up Elijah Moore. He'd have some more value. They had Corey Davis, a veteran receiver, and maybe they add a little bit more help. You had 2 tight ends as well. They were very productive when they got the ball on C.J. Uzomah from the Bengals and Tyler Conklin from the Vikings. So they can run different personnel looks. They've got some depth here. Aaron Rodgers is going to take full advantage of. Remember, Uzomah and Conklin were big producers there previously in Cincinnati and Minnesota. So you have those older tight ends, you got those younger skill players, get maybe another receiver there, and you're in business with Packers. So with the transition, like the Packers here with the Jets, so you kind of have a Packers East going on here in New York. So that's definitely the number one situation here because Garrett Wilson would immediately jump up to wide receiver one. Brees Hall, we know he was already operating like an RB1. Elijah Moore would come into the picture here. Corey Davis would have value. Both of those tight ends would come into the picture as having some appeal. They're more so Conklin because he's more the offline receiver type, or almost the blocker. Conklin would already have some tight end one appeal. That's how important Aaron Rodgers would be there. So he'd definitely be the most appealing with the Jets. Now, the close number two team here is the Raiders. And you look at the Raiders and you might say, okay, they have the weapons here, but it's also an offensive transition for Rodgers where he would already know what Nathaniel Hackett is trying to do. They're in New York. Here it would be Josh McDaniels. It's a complicated system. You'd have to learn it. But we've heard Tom Brady say in the past, if Aaron Rodgers had played in McDaniel's system, he would have had gazillion touchdowns and a million Super Bowls or whatever that quote was. But the bottom line is he thought Aaron Rodgers would just kill it and kind of have that GOAT status that he might have had if he had the benefit of what Josh McDaniels provided the offense. But you look at it, Davante Adams, there's the trade-off there. Instead of getting the coordinator, he would get the wide receiver he knows really well, Davante Adams. That would be just like it was a couple years ago in Green Bay, pick up where it left off. A little concerned about the other weapons here. Darren Waller is getting a little bit older. Hunter Renfrow is a limited slot receiver at this point. Didn't do a lot last year. They need to get an upgrade on the number two outside guy from Matt Collins, who's a free agent. So I think they'll do that. The offensive line is a little bit concerning as well, where I think the Jets, you have Mekhi Becton and Elijah Vera Tucker. If those guys can come back healthy as young linemen, they're going to help Rodgers quite a bit in that system. So a few more concerns that are beyond the surface that the Raiders have that the Jets don't. But these are two excellent landing spots. I think either spot for Rodgers would be a QB1. Davante Adams, he was already a wide receiver one. Renfrow could come back as a wide receiver three, and Darren Waller would, of course, crush it as a tight end one again. So I just a little bit concerned with the injuries and age on Waller there versus the youthful Jets being a little bit more upside worthy. And Adams is also getting up there. So a little bit concerned that, again, the whole McDaniels thing versus the whole Hackett with Rodgers thing. But it's really close, and it would be great for Rodgers to keep putting up those numbers we know for a long time as a QB1, rebound from last year, and then those Jets and Raiders skill players would also go up. All right, so there you have a look at the top two destinations. You've been hearing a lot about those teams here for Rodgers, and I think those are the two most likely teams because they've kind of set themselves up to do that. The Raiders without Derek Carr, the Jets without a quarterback solution, period. So we'll see how that plays out for both teams in the pursuit, but there's also four other teams that could go after Rodgers. So we'll get into those in our final two segments here on the show. It's Locked On Fantasy Football on a Monday and a new week here. And there's a new game that you should be checking out. We told you at the top, this episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can tell you how much fun it was to compete against fellow Locked On host. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers ended up being the champion, but now you have a chance to compete as well in the Locked On League and test your knowledge of being a team building professional there and compete against other Locked On listeners. But more on that later. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, lead your team to glory while trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of the season. It's fantastic. It is a nice way to get in on a different aspect of fantasy football. That's right, living out our dreams as a fantasy GM. So you can do that, challenge your friends, and it's all this in a challenging, realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want to and when you want to. So it's a lot of fun to have access to the game there whenever you're looking to continue your football knowledge. We've created a Locked On League, again, for you to compete against other Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose the Locked On League in the app to join. Create your football dynasty today. Locked On Fantasy Football listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On all caps in the game store. That's Locked On all caps, so make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Time to continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football, and we're going to look at the number 3 and number 4 destinations for Aaron Rodgers to leave Green Bay and have a better fantasy football value here. So Jets and Raiders were number 1 and number 2. Number 3 team is also a sleeper to acquire Aaron Rodgers. And I talked about the Colts and wanting to get out of the cycle of recycling quarterbacks, but this would be a little bit different because they wouldn't recycle Aaron Rodgers. He would be there for several seasons if he was the guy. He's not going to be a Philip Rivers or Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, one-and-done type situation. I think Rodgers would be there for multiple years because this Colts team is young and has a window of winning right now. So I would not sleep on the Colts. Again, they have some good defensive pieces. We know starting with DeForest Buckner, that front. So really good. And if Shaquille Leonard can be healthy on the second level, you got a very good defense. So good complementary defense that can go after it against the pass. Then you look at the Colts' offensive weapons, Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce. Maybe they bring back Paris Campbell, or maybe Paris Campbell wants to return all of a sudden with Rodgers in the mix. And all of a sudden you have a slot dynamic guy. And you have those 2 guys on the outside. And Pittman can also be a big slot. And you have some young tight ends. You know, Jelani Woods and Kyle Granson leading the way there, Mo Ali Cox. So you got some weapons there. You got a decent offensive line that could have a rebound. I think they could use some tackle help, but Quentin Nelson can be pretty special. He just has had an off. Partly probably because exposed by not having the right quarterbacks in Wentz and Ryan to make that offensive line look a little bit better. But then you have the ultimate chip here, also from Wisconsin in a different way, Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield. So you have a running game to take pressure off Rodgers. You got receivers on the outside, field stretching guys, speed, quickness, size. You got all of that here for Rodgers. So I think it's more, can they fit in the Shane Steichen offense that's a little bit different? He hasn't had that, but Steichen did have a great effect, we know, on a mobile quarterback in Jalen Hurts. So you'll have the RPO action and all that kind of good stuff here to help Rodgers, which has been successful. He's been mainly the P in RPO passing there for Matt LaFleur, but look at all that good stuff. I think that'll be a good influence. So offensive-minded hire here for the Colts. Do not sleep on the Colts making this power move. They have the number 4 overall pick as a big bargaining chip here for the Packers. They know they have Jordan Love as a starting quarterback, so then the Packers don't even need to use that pick on a quarterback. So big asset here that the Colts are sitting on, and they can be aggressive with their GM, Chris Ballard. We've seen that. He's willing to make trades. He's willing to make blockbusters, and Aaron Rodgers has to be in that mix for sure. So it'd be great. I mean, Pittman would bump up. Alec Pierce would have a promising year 2. Paris Campbell, if he comes back, has some potential there if he doesn't leave for, say, Frank Reich and the Panthers. So there's things to look at for sure with Aaron Rodgers landing with the Colts. And again, he would bump up, and these guys would all get a bump all across the board, including Taylor out of the backfield. I think some support of the pass game and also having a bigger factor as a back catching passes. All right, let's go to the next team. And these are the teams as we transition, maybe not as appealing there as you might think, but Aaron Rodgers could change that. So Jets, Raiders, Colts, we're excited about those destinations for sure. The Titans, I know right now they're not a passing team, but they're also transitioning their offense. They want to become a passing team, I think, and realize, look, this Derrick Henry running heavy, we've hit the ceiling with this. We need to open things up. We got Treylon Burks. We can go after other receivers here. Titans, again, Mike Vrabel is a nice players coach to play for, so that could also appeal to Aaron Rodgers here. Nashville has been a popular destination for a lot of NFL players to live in the offseason, so that would be also a good fit, a good city. It's a small city vibe there. You know, Nashville is way bigger than Green Bay, but that kind of community sense, the thing that's there. So that's the off-field reasons and kind of the intangibles you get there, but Treylon Burks is a pretty good reason. Yeah, Chig Okonkwo. I think these two guys are going to be key in their offense going forward. Again, they're going to add to these skill players for sure. This is not what they're going to have. So you bring in Rodgers, you're going to do things where you can pass the ball better downfield. So I like those two guys being the baseline, two speedy athletes there. The offensive line could get a little bit of help, maybe rebuild it. They have to give up that first round pick where you might look at an offensive tackle. They need Taylor Lewan healthy, but they could also address right tackle. So it's not the greatest, but I don't see, again, the Titans being what the Titans are with that run heavy offense. I think, again, it's not as appealing as those other situations, but if you get Rodgers, you're going to invest in things to help Rodgers, and that's the bottom line. And he's going to change things. The way we saw with Tom Brady and the Buccaneers for 3 seasons, they adjusted to what Tom Brady needed, and you saw Tom Brady put up some big fantasy numbers there to close his career in Tampa. And I think Tennessee is a very similar place. I know they don't have the establishment of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but I think they'll get those beyond Burks and Okonkwo here. So Aaron Rodgers would drop a little bit. I think when you look at the Jets, Raiders, Colts, he's a high-end QB1. If he goes to Titans, he's more of a back-end QB2. So that's how you look at it there with these two teams. So, yeah, he could definitely end up in the AFC South. I don't see him going to the Texans. There we talked about quarterback-needy teams, and they're definitely one of them, of course. So with Davis Mills, I just don't see Aaron Rodgers wanting to go there, and I just don't see the Texans going in that direction here. So with the DeMeco Ryans, maybe they can convince a player of Rodgers' caliber to come, but I just don't see it as a destination. We also mentioned Frank Reich and the Panthers. I just don't see Rodgers wanting to play there. I think they have to go after a mid-level quarterback such as Derek Carr. So those are the two teams that we did not include. But again, Jets, Packers, Colts, and then we draw a line a bit and drop to the Titans here. And we have two more teams we'll talk about that are also appealing. I just think they're less likely to acquire Rodgers, but we wanted to go over them on today's show. Make sure you're checking out our sister show, Locked On Fantasy Basketball. The NBA All-Star Game and All-Star break are over, so second half stretch and a lot of good stuff to talk about with fantasy basketball. So check it out. Josh Lloyd does a great job there. Locked On Fantasy Basketball here on the network. Part of the many great shows we have all across sports here on Locked On for you. Locked On NFL, Locked On NBA, and of course, Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your ultimate companion piece to those things that we talk about. Reality fantasy meets reality here on the Locked On Network. All right, time to close the show here and look at the final two teams that should be in play for the services of Aaron Rodgers, and just less likely to land there. But the Buccaneers, would they be aggressive and go the same route with Tom Brady, end up with a GOAT, and then transition to Aaron Rodgers? You can't rule it out, because they still could win. I mean, you have a few free agent issues, including Levante David, some guys in your secondary, including Jamel Dean, that you're worried about. But the Buccaneers still have a good establishment to go after and win a championship. They have their new offensive coordinator coming from Seattle, so there's that in place to try to change things up. And you still have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. You've got Cade Otton now. We'll see if Cameron Brate still is in the mix there with the Buccaneers, but some really good weapons. The offensive line, of course, with Tristan Wirfs and Donovan Smith, still pretty intact here. They just need to go get a little bit more receiving help as a third option would be great for Rodgers, but Evans and Godwin is a nice spot for him here. Again, I'm not sure what you're going to get for the rest of the offense. You'll have running game in transition potentially. Leonard Fournette still under contract for one more year, but is it more Rashad White this year? So I think they need a little bit more help. I know Evans and Godwin are appealing, but again, this team is caught in a little cap situation. If they need to move Evans, I don't know they'll do that if they get Rodgers. But again, Rodgers would be pretty solid here as a QB1. I just don't see him lighting it up the way we think here with those other situations with the Jets, Raiders, and Colts. So it's obviously something to think about. I also think the Buccaneers are a bit handcuffed with their cap situation and how much they would have to give up. They don't really have the draft capital here with their late picking here as a division champion and a consistent winner there. So they don't have a lot of flexibility to make this trade, and that's why I don't want to spend too much time thinking about it, but it would be intriguing there if he landed with Evans and Godwin for sure. And I think it would be slightly less than what we saw with the QB1 status, but again, a little bit maybe on par with what Rodgers would bring to the Titans with his fantasy football value. All right, the last team we'll talk about here is the Washington Commanders. Now, they've been adamant here with their new offensive coordinator, who's now Eric Bieniemy, by the way. So they get Bieniemy from the Chiefs. He does not get a head coaching job, but maybe he wanted to have a better situation where he could call plays and then have the springboard there, because Andy Reid is the guy doing that still in Kansas City. He is his former coordinator Matt Nagy, they're also helping him. So there's a lot of familiarity with what the Chiefs are doing. So I think Bieniemy wanted to kind of spread his own wings a little bit and call some plays. And the Commanders replacing Scott Turner here under Ron Rivera. So Bieniemy is intriguing, right? He was working with Patrick Mahomes, and we saw what another surrogate there of Andy Reid, Mike Kafka, did with the Giants, helping another mobile, strong-arm quarterback in New York and Daniel Jones. You got some connection to Daniel Jones from Bieniemy to Kafka. You got Bieniemy trying to do the same, maybe influence another quarterback. Is it going to be Sam Howell? I mean, do we really trust them to just go with Sam Howell? That's a big question mark here with the Commanders. Or are they going to look for a veteran bridge? Taylor Heineke's a free agent. They can easily get out of Carson Wentz's contract. So they could definitely go after someone. Maybe it's a lower level guy like Jacoby Brissett to try to work into the offense. But heck, they could go after Aaron Rodgers. There's not anything to rule that out here. And the Commanders want to be competitive too. Look, they're trying to chase the Eagles, who just got to the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. The Cowboys are well established with Dak Prescott. Got Daniel Jones on his way up with the Giants. So the Commanders may say, look, we need to get into the quarterback mix. We don't like our chances in the draft to go where we want to go. Aaron Rodgers can make us an instant contender in the NFC. And they might have some interest there with Mark Mayhew, Ron Rivera, Jason Reichus, and the brain trust there trying to lead this team and change the image there and move on. So would not be surprised if the Commanders throw their helmets into the mix and try to go after Aaron Rodgers here. And this would be a decent spot as well. You got Terry McLaurin, you have Jahan Dotson. I think this could be a run-oriented offense of Bieniemy, a former running back at Colorado, and open things up there in the passing game and based it on that. And you do have that back in Brian Robinson Jr. and Tony Gibson. They can move on from him with the new coaching staff. So something to look at, but you do have a baseline of two good weapons here. Does Logan Thomas come back and tight end be a factor? How about Curtis Samuel? So some good landing spots here for Rodgers. Again, I just separate where I think Jets, Raiders, and Colts, easy QB1 on the higher end. These are more back-end QB1s. But however you slice it, Aaron Rodgers, wherever he goes to any of these teams outside of Green Bay, he's in a great situation to bump back up his fantasy numbers and, of course, boost the fantasy values of everyone around him. So there you have it. There's your look at the top 6 landing spots for fantasy football for Aaron Rodgers, should he be traded from the Packers, as now rumored coming out of Green Bay. So interesting offseason ahead, and this is the biggest storyline that we're going to be watching for sure. So we'll keep track of it all season long. We'll have reaction when it happens, of course, as well, to break down this, or if it doesn't happen and he decides to stay in Green Bay and what that means for that team as well going forward with Aaron Jones now on the restructured contract. So all kinds of good stuff to come in the offseason. Just a hint of what's to come and what's going to be very busy. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to all of you on all our platforms. And check out also Locked On Sports Today. Great show there that giving you the updated quick look at all the big stories in sports. Check it out, Locked On Sports Today, only Locked On Network. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll check you out on Tuesday with our next episode.